Hey everyone, welcome to a college basketball edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, it's been a rough season for my Tigers on the gridiron, but on the hard court, been excellent. Auburn got up to their highest ranking since I think the Bruce Pearls had him at number 4 one time, but there's been very few times in the history of Auburn basketball we've gotten to this. I think one time in 2019, Bruce Pearl got us up to number 4. This team has only had one loss, a loss to UConn in double overtime. Since then, they've rattled off 14 wins in a row. And last night, they went and took on number 24 Alabama in Coleman Coliseum on the road. And Auburn pulled off a huge win against a very talented Alabama team. And of course, there was a lot of shenanigans afterwards, a lot of Auburn players doing the Karate Kid thing, which I thought was really funny because especially, you think about what happened during the Iron Bowl and basically the whole Auburn team was doing it. And Auburn now has become such a force in basketball. Their fans are traveling so well. I mean, I don't know if you watched the game last night at all, but there was probably, at least maybe a quarter of the fans there were Auburn basketball fans who had traveled up. And I was just really impressed with the resiliency of this team, especially in a game where one of their best players, Walker Kessler, the 7-foot giant who had transferred from North Carolina, got into foul trouble and didn't play for pretty much the entire game. Dylan Cardwell came in and really did a great job of relieving him. And of course, you saw Jabari Smith show why he's likely the number 1 overall pick in the draft, dropping 25 points. And Wendell Green showing all of his range that brings back fond memories if you're an Auburn fan to people like Bryce Brown and Jared Harper. But just another great win for Auburn on the road. And Joe, I mean, to me, it looks like right now this might be Bruce Pearl's best team he's had since he's been at Auburn.
I mean, this seems like a great team. We'll see if they can make it to the Final Four like the 2019 team. That way they don't fall on that list, like we were just going through of the Georgia, Alabama teams. But I think they got a good chance. Jabari Smith is definitely such a catalyst, projected number 1 pick this year. And I think that the mistake that I made was that I watched too much of the Ole Miss Texas A&M game. I definitely wish I'd watched the Auburn Alabama game based on all reports that I heard because the other game was so bad for Ole Miss. And, I was monitoring the score, though, of this game, and I'm impressed that Auburn won because, this is an Alabama team that has some marquee wins to start the season, most notably knocking off Gonzaga back in December.
Yeah, it's a very good Alabama team now, and they haven't quite exceeded the expectations people thought they would be at. I think they were preseason the highest ranked SEC team. They were preseason, I think, number 8 or 9. And right now they're at 24. They're weird. They're a team that definitely plays to the level of their competition. Of course, you referenced they beat Gonzaga. There's another big time team they beat too. I think maybe it was Kansas in the offseason. And then, of course, in their SEC regular season, they lose to South Carolina, who's not a great team. But then that game against Auburn last night, they gave Auburn everything they wanted and then some. And they showed a lot of strength because Auburn got up by 14 points in the second half. And Alabama went on a 14-0 run to tie it up at 77 all. And then at that point, Alabama didn't score another point. Auburn scored the last 4 points of the game. And it was interesting because at the very end of the game, the players who made a difference were not the ones who had, been doing it the whole game. It was Dylan Cardwell with his defense. And then Alan Flanagan coming in and making some clutch free throws at the end, which he's been, playing very well for someone that's recovered from a lot of injuries this year. And he was definitely a guy that a lot of Auburn people thought would be one of the better players on the team, but now is just having to really grit through what has been a tough injury season.
Yeah, and speaking of grit, it's impressive, as you referenced earlier, to be able to overcome, the limited ability playing time wise of a Walker Kessler. That's a big loss as far as rebounding. He's an impactful former 5-star recruit out of North Carolina previously. But yeah, I think that when I look at Alabama in this game, obviously, they were right there. But there's something about this team that's changed a little bit when we got to conference play. Like they don't seem quite like the same team. I don't know. I can't tell if it's the loss of Herb Smith from last year, if they're kind of missing him more than they expected. They still have Shackelford and Quinterly, but it seems like they are a little bit of a different team without Herb Smith, and understandably so.
Yeah, they're not quite at the same level defensively as what they've been in the past. And I'll tell you, I mean, obviously they weren't going to get Irv Smith back, and they weren't going to, get back some of the other guys that they had that had been there for a long time. Um, but this year, I think the biggest player that they lost was Josh Primo from last year's team. Primo was a freshman, and he ended up being drafted in the top 20, but he's a guy that a lot of Alabama fans wish they could have had for one more season because remember, I was saying last year, I thought Primo was the most talented player they had on their team.
Hmm.
And of course, I mean, when you're getting a top 20 grade, you're going to go out. But, now they have Quinterly and they have Shackelford, but Quinterly is a very good point guard, but they don't have that dynamic scorer that you need, I think, to really go to the next level, like what they had basically all over the court last year. And I think this is a good Alabama team, but it's not going to be near what they had last year.
No, no, and they had not made up, for the loss of the scoring from the two guys that we talked about.
That's right. Well, Joe, talking about the rest of the SEC, I mean, like we said, Alabama's got a good team. Kentucky just keeps on seeing amazing nights all the time from Azubikwe getting like 30 points and 20 rebounds and just putting up amazing results. But, yet again, even with Kentucky, I mean, I think what I'm seeing with Auburn is this amazing depth. I've never seen this where Auburn has so many options to beat you with. You have your Jabari Smith, who's going to be the number one overall player, just an amazing, forward. And then you have Walker Kessler, 7'1", can rebound great, can score it on the inside, good free throw shooter. I mean, then when Kessler goes out, Cardwell plays great defense. And then you also have the really good scoring off the bench of Wendell Green, who keeps getting 20-point games. And then Katie Johnson, the transfer from Georgia, also does great. And then Alan Flanagan is still doing a lot with him being hampered by an injury. But when he gets to be full strength, he could be the second best player on this team. So I'm just really impressed right now with what I see as the best depth I've ever seen from a Bruce Pearl team.
No, they definitely have that great depth. And, when you kind of compare them to other teams in the SEC, I mean, Kentucky's the most formidable challenger, obviously so. But I still can't decide what I think about this Kentucky team either. Now, they definitely have had just an unbelievable bounce-back season from last year's just, questionably, surprisingly bad team. Like, I think they had a losing record last year, which is still unfathomable in the grand scheme of things. But I feel like, Auburn is in great position to win the SEC still, but you kind of feel like it'll more than likely be down to those two teams. However, one dark horse I'd throw in is Texas A&M. I know that it's kind of recency bias with them maybe playing Ole Miss last night, but they are 3-0 in the league, and I think that they could be a top 4 SEC team.
Well, we'll see. I mean, so far I thought LSU was really good. Auburn got them by 15. That was the first game that LSU had lost. It still blows my mind that Will Wade is LSU's coach. I guess they just decided they're disbanding the NCAA's investigative force because Will Wade's never going to get punished. I mean, is that where we're at basically with it? Because he's doing a great job, but at this point, you feel like the only one who got hit by anything in that entire investigation was Sean Miller.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but now Arizona, crazily in the Pac-12, they look great. And the interesting thing about them is, their head coach is Tommy Lloyd, who was a former Mark Few assistant for like 15 years at Gonzaga. So, that's an interesting factor how he's kind of brought the Mark Few impact to Arizona.
That's right, Joe. And speaking of Arizona, everybody's been making fun of the Pac-12 in football. They haven't had a team make the college football playoff since the 2014 or the 2016 Washington team, right? But basketball this year, they're great. I mean, they got 3 of the top 6 teams in basketball. UCLA's at 3, USC, which just had their first loss last night at number 5, and then Arizona at 6. So while you're not doing great at football right now in the Pac-12, really good year for Pac-12 basketball right now with 3 of the top 6 teams.
Oh, absolutely. USC is really good. Andy Enfield, who used to be at Florida Gulf Coast years ago, took them to the Sweet 16. UCLA with Johnny Juzang, Arizona. I mean, this is a very formidable conference.
That's right. I mean, this UCLA team returns a lot from last year. Juzang, Tyre, really awesome UCLA team. You could definitely see in the Final Four again. And then, Joe, right there at 1 and 2, very familiar. You got Baylor at 1 and Gonzaga at 2. which, right now, would you say you think you're going to see a rematch of that in the championship game, or do you think you see another team sliding in there?
I think another team more than likely will slide in. I don't know who it will be. I would say that, the odds are probably against the rematch. Now, Baylor's loss last night kind of surprised me. I think that they still have a good chance to wreak havoc in the Big 12. Gonzaga, I feel like, will do what they normally do throughout the regular season. I am a little bit concerned, though, about their guard play for the NCAA tournament. Like, I know they're going to have Chet Holmgren and, of course, Drew Timme, and obviously those guys are the best probably front court in the country outside of Purdue. But I do think we have to watch in the NCAA tournament the lack of Jalen Suggs and how important he was last year that could keep Gonzaga out of the title game.
That's right, Joe. I mean, college basketball, I feel like, is more dependent on guards than the pros are. So that is a big thing to be lacking that. And Joe, speaking of lacking, the last thing I want to talk about really quick with college basketball is the ACC. Duke is at number 3. Right? I think they're at like number 8 right now, and they're the only ranked team in the ACC, which is a mind-blowing sentence because the ACC for most of my life has been the SEC of football in basketball. The ACC has been the most dominant conference. And now we see a year where the only team ranked in the ACC is Duke. And meanwhile, in the SEC, you have Auburn, LSU, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, all ranked teams. And so it's just weird to see where the ACC is in basketball, because you can definitely say right now they're behind the SEC. They're certainly behind the Pac-12, and then certainly behind the Big 12, probably behind the Big 10. They're probably the least of the Power 5 conferences right now in basketball.
No, that's very true. I mean, I think that one issue I've noticed is, with the exception of Duke, I just don't see a whole lot of star power in that league. You don't have the household names that you normally do. And so I think that's a big deal. And you've also had some coaching turnover as well recently.
That's right, man. North Carolina, of course, is in their first season with their new head coach. And, really the biggest surprise, I think, is not seeing Florida State in the top 25 with how consistent they've been over the last 10 or 15 years.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
All right, Joe, with that being said, you can always consistently count on us. And we're about to come in and give you our picks for the NFL playoff wildcard weekend, including a couple picks that you can go to Biloxi or go to Vegas with to make. And you see us on the other side, and we'll give you our NFL wildcard preview. And if you want to catch all of our episodes on Spotify, look at the Dan and Joe Sports Show on Spotify. And you can also find us on YouTube with our own YouTube channel. And then, of course, you can like us on Facebook at DJ Sports Show. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.